We're going to begin talking today about how to be fearless in the face of life's storms. Now, usually when you think of storms, you typically think of winter, right? I mean, the thunder begins way off in the distance, and then the sky begins to grow dark, and eventually the rain starts to fall. And that's generally the time when you're pleased to be working indoors or sitting by the fire enjoying a coffee. But as I speak to you today, a storm has been forecast for this afternoon, even though it's the middle of summer. I mean, out there, the sun is shining, the birds are singing, the air conditioners are working overtime. I had to walk really early this morning because it was already baking hot by 7 o'clock. So unless I had heard the weather report, unexpected storms would be the last thing on my mind. After all, this really isn't the season for storms. Although, where we live in Australia, summer storms can often cause the most damage because they're out of the ordinary. The ground is so baking dry that the water just runs off and causes all kinds of flooding. So I want to talk about that today because when it comes to the storms in our lives, I'm convinced it's the ones that we never saw coming that have the potential to cause us to fear and to let go of our trust in God. I mean, there are storms that you see coming a long time before they hit, and you can get prepared for them, but it's the ones that come out of nowhere that are often the kind of storms with the potential, if we're not careful, to knock us off our feet. So that's what we're going to look at today. See, the truth is, friend, all of us are going to face storms in our life. We can't do anything about that. You might remember in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus talked about a guy who wisely built his house upon a solid rocky foundation. And then he contrasted that with another guy who built his house upon the sand. Now, no doubt the guy who built upon the sand incurred way less cost in building that way. No doubt he had that house built in record time, and I can imagine he sat there on his front deck in a comfortable chair laughing at his neighbor who was still pounding away, digging down that foundation into the stone. I mean, while the sun was shining, the guy who built his house upon the sand was way ahead in monetary terms and bragging rights, and he had a whole lot less blisters and backache from the effort, right? But you know, Jesus said the most important thing wasn't any of that, but how those two houses stood up to the storms of life. Because if there's one thing that we can count on in life, it's storms, right? You know, in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus uses the same phrase twice, once for each house. He said there, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house. He said that about the house built on the rock, and he said exactly the same thing for the house built upon the sand. Now, why did he do that? Why didn't he just say, and the storm came against both those houses? Well, I'm convinced, friend, it was because he was emphasizing the point that it really doesn't matter who you are, what you have, how long you've been a believer, or what your bank balance looks like. You can count on the fact that storms are going to come. Why? Well, primarily because we have a spiritual enemy who Jesus told us in John chapter 10 and verse 10 is focused on doing three things over and over and over. You know them. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Amen? Anything to do with stealing, killing, destroying, you can be sure that our spiritual enemy, the devil, is behind that. Storms of life, unexpected, violent, tragic events, something that comes out of nowhere and tries to steal your peace, that's not coming from God, friend. It's coming from the one who is committed in these last days to doing all that he can to steal, kill, and destroy. So Jesus says that both the house built on the sand and the house built on the rock are hit with this devastating storm. Listen to it again. Jesus says the rain fell and the floods came and the wind blew and beat against that house. Each house experienced the same storm. And that's important to see. What was coming against the guy who had taken the time to dig this strong foundation was no different than what came against the guy who threw his house up in 3 days. The severity of the storm was the same. The intensity was the same. All of the physical elements of that storm were exactly the same. So here's what I want you to know, and we'll go deeper into this in the next message. You cannot expect, friend, to live a storm-free life. Okay? Just because you love God and you choose to live for Him doesn't guarantee that it'll be smooth sailing all the time. As I said, we're looking right now at how to be fearless in the face of life's storms. Make no mistake about it, storms are going to come your way. So rather than being blindsided by a storm, it'd be wise for us to prepare now while the sun is still shining. And let's understand that 99% of the time, the one behind the storms of life is our spiritual enemy. I say 99% of the time because if we disobey God, if we go our own way, if we mess around in a whole bunch of things that we shouldn't, yes, we can create storms in our relationships, in our finances, in our lives. You know that. But if you're living for God and you're obeying His word, and a storm comes out of nowhere against your life, you can be sure, friend, that it's not coming from God. He's not the author of storms. It's coming from your spiritual enemy. And you can know that the enemy's purpose in sending that storm your way is to get you afraid. He wants you to let go of your faith. In doing so, he knows if he can get you afraid and letting go of your faith, then you're going to miss all that God has for you. Why? Because without faith, it's impossible to please God. Because without faith, it's impossible to receive from God. So let me make this point and we'll go further next time. I want you to understand that being hit by a storm in your life does not mean that you missed God. Okay? So important to understand. Facing unexpected storms in your life does not mean that you missed God or that you're doing something wrong. And I say that because I hear people all the time talking like that. They'll step out by faith in some area, get hit by a storm, some kind of opposition, a challenge, a difficulty, then they'll immediately shrink back in fear and say things like, well, this can't be God. I must have heard wrong. No. Being hit by a storm does not mean that you missed God. In fact, friend, it's often an indicator that you're on exactly the right track and you need to stay in faith and keep on going. See, here's the thing. When God's told you to do something, the enemy is never just going to sit by and let you receive it, achieve it, and impact the world for Jesus Christ without trying to stop you. Okay? Now, if you do what we're going to learn in these messages, the enemy can throw whatever he likes at you, but none of it is going to move you. Amen? And more importantly, so long as you refuse to quit and you don't let go of your faith, the devil is powerless to prevent what God has said is coming to pass in your life. That's good news. If you'll just stay in faith and refuse to entertain those doubts and those fears and that unbelief, I'm telling you, friend, the enemy is powerless to stop what God said from coming to pass in your life. So, don't let the storms move you. Don't let the waves unsettle you. You just keep doing what He's told you to do. And you'll not only be fearless in the face of the storms, but you're going to come out the other side and receive all that God has promised. And I'll talk more about how to do that in the next message. But until then, make sure you subscribe. Check out our website, newboldministries.com. There you can purchase a copy of my brand new book called Fearless, Freedom from Fear in an Anxious World. And if you'd like to help us continue to get these messages of faith out to people around the globe, you can give a gift or become a partner today at newboldministries.com. God bless, and I'll talk to you again real soon.